I've noticed a polarization of most climbers into one of two camps when it comes to the role of strength training in climbing. Both in real life and online, there are on the one hand those who swear by the role of climbing technique and they advocate to just climb in order to improve in climbing and generally don't do any kind of off-the-wall strength training, potentially apart from some light fingerboarding. And on the other hand, there are some people with usually background in some other sport that sometimes go down a rabbit hole of training protocols and improving at climbing benchmarks, and then kind of lose sight of the initial goal, which was to improve at climbing itself. In this video, I wanted to take the middle path between those two extremes, one only valuing technique and the other one overvaluing the role of strength in climbing, and instead talk about the role that I see for strength training in climbing, which is not to replace technique, but instead to accelerate technical learning and improvement in climbing. Let's get into it. I think the polarization that I described a bit earlier is due to a confusion when it comes to causation, and bear with me a little bit here. To take an example from my field of neuroscience, when we produce a movement with our limbs, it is our principal or pyramidal neurons in the motor cortex that send the signals down to the spinal cord and the muscles to produce a specific movement. In this sense, their activity is the instructive, direct cause of the movement. However, there are also other types of cells in the cortex, for example, astrocytes, and these cells don't specify the movement to be executed, but rather play a supportive role by modulating the blood flow to the principal neurons and helping them regulate their metabolic activity. And in that sense, they have a permissive role for movement by allowing the principal neurons to function effectively. Without either of these types of cells, movement could not be produced. However, they play different roles in the production of movement, one having a direct causative role and the other one a permissive role. And hopefully, if you followed my analogy so far, I think the same holds true for technique versus strength in climbing. Technique, as we know, is absolutely necessary in order to produce the correct movements at the right time on the wall to achieve the desired effect and climb higher. But strength training can allow technique itself to be acquired at a faster pace so that we can improve faster at climbing. And this is because of three main reasons as far as I can tell. The first reason, which is relatively obvious, I would think, is that strength training can make you a more robust athlete and less likely to get injured. Even though this is intuitive enough, it's also well supported in the current scientific literature. For example, this big meta-analysis, including 25 studies with a total of more than 25,000 participants across all of them, showed that strength training reduces acute injuries by about 67% and overuse injuries by about 50% as well. This is especially important for heavily technical sports like climbing, since skill acquisition benefits from consistent exposure across large periods of time to thousands and thousands of movements and different movement variations. So you can think of minimizing time away from climbing due to injuries as maximizing the number of moves you can do over long periods of time, and therefore maximizing the amount of learning you can get from it. The second way in which strength training can improve your technical ability is by increasing your exercise capacity. And again, this is corroborated in research both in sports science and into elderly or injured populations. As far as I understand, there are at least two different things that contribute to this effect. And the first one is that strength training can improve movement economy, so actually using less energy at a certain level of intensity. And the second is an increased proportion of type 2A muscle fibers, which are the muscle fibers that can produce high power output while still being less easily fatigued than their stronger counterparts, the type 2X fibers. The bottom line, as I see it, is that strength training would allow you to do more and higher quality attempts at your projects, which would then allow you to acquire technical knowledge faster than a peer who would be doing fewer or kind of half-assed attempts at their projects instead. And finally, the third way that strength training can improve your climbing technique would be by providing you with a threshold baseline level of strength in order to perform some basic moves in climbing. For example, if you can't engage your shin muscles, the anterior tibialis muscles, above a certain threshold, it will be hard for you to keep a toe hook and get the benefit from it in order to execute a move, and you might abandon that beta completely in favor of a different method that is potentially more brute force that gets you to the same end result. Sometimes people might have the absolute strength to potentially do a move like a heel hook, for example, but lack sufficient mind-muscle connection to engage the specific muscle at the right time. A lot of people will just flop their heels onto a hold without actually engaging their heels during the movement, and instead what they end up doing usually is still pull hard with their upper body, and what ends up happening is that their heel pops off because there is no actual force going through it, and you actually burn your upper body faster. My point here is not to do deadlifts until you can lift 3 times your body weight, but rather that if you don't have a specific entry level strength in order to do a move, then it will be impossible for you to start exploring the vast space of variations that are possible for a certain climbing movement, which is where the technical learning actually happens. If you're not able to engage your hamstring at the right time, how are you going to start exploring the different subtleties of precise heel placement, or the angle of your of the heel, or the rotation of your hips, or heel to coming, and so on? And what's more, in order for your mind to be free enough to explore all these different variations, the climb needs to be of a low enough level for you so that you can focus and intentionally move, instead of your whole attention being consumed by just trying to stay on the wall with all your might. And that's why usually climbing drills and different exercises are suggested to be done at a level that is a little bit below your max, right? But unfortunately, you won't encounter many interesting problems on which you can advance your technical learning in most indoor gyms, maybe apart from Japan, where even V0s, as far as I can understand, can be interesting and tricky to do. No wonder they produce so many high-level competition climbers. To preempt a couple of objections here, yes, you could force some interesting moves even on jack ladders, but I would invite you to try it for a while and see how interesting that is, or just to take a look at beginners and see how often they actually do those drills on the very easy problems. And what about all the pro climbers out there that essentially never do any off-the-wall strength training and yet are still the best out there, like Janja, for example, in her recent video with Magnus?
Anything else other than climbing? Do you need like weights or?
Yeah, honestly, I don't do cardio, I don't do gym.
Wow.
I think the best like training for climbing is just climbing.
What do you think is the biggest mistake people do? Is there like one thing that people?
Hangboarding.
Okay, wow.
Don't kill me, don't kill me.
My answer to this is that, of course, if you're one of the lucky ones that started climbing before you were a teen, then yes, your body has adapted perfectly to your sport during its most formative and plastic years, acquiring both the strength and the skill necessary to do any kind of move just by climbing during all these years. But if you're like me, maybe a little bit on the older side and having started climbing older, maybe carrying some injury baggage from before, then I'd say that your climbing might significantly benefit from some strength training off the wall. But what kind of strength training should one do, and how much strength is enough? Well, if you're curious about what I do, you can check out two videos that I've made previously, one which is on weightlifting for climbing and one on the warm-ups that I do for climbing, into which I incorporate kind of climbing specific strength training. And these two videos include essentially all the off-the-wall training that I do. For the second question, I would say stay tuned, because I'm planning to make a video testing myself on some climbing specific benchmarks and discussing a little bit about when you are strong enough and when it might be time to look elsewhere for climbing improvement. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know in the comments your opinions on strength training for climbing and whether you already do any. Do you even lift, bro? And see you in the next video, everyone. Bye.